I wanted to get your take on the SEC as far as the scheduling. They're looking at 8 games. Some have said, well, they might consider 9 games for fear that maybe if you don't have a 9-game schedule, it might hurt you in the voting polls or perhaps the BCS formula in the computers. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, we've made a lot of progress on scheduling, Jimmy, and it is the collective hope of everybody from Mike Slav, our commissioner, down through each institution that we can bring that to culmination in Destin. So that's the hope, that we'll be able to do that. We will play in the short term for certain. We will play 8 games. So we haven't had a lot of conversation relative to anything else.
What is your theory on non-conference scheduling? Tennessee's got NC State this year. In the past, Tennessee's usually had a marquee team, another team that was pretty good, and then 2 what you might call bye games. What are your thoughts on a non-conference schedule?
I think, given the fact that we're going to play 8 games for now, that the non-conference schedule will be very similar, because it goes without saying that when you play in this league, there aren't any Saturdays that you can take off, so to speak. And the reality is, in other leagues, there are some Saturdays that aren't as difficult. Maybe the team doesn't play the same physical brand of football as some of the other teams in their leagues, but in this league, every game is a physical game, and so I think I've always been a proponent of playing one really good out-of-conference game, and certainly NC State qualifies this year in the opener there in Atlanta. And then I think, Jimmy, we just have to kind of see where we go from there, and that's part of the discussions we're having internally as well as within the SEC office in our meetings that we've been conducting.
Do you feel an obligation on your home schedule to have some quality opponents for your fans to come? Tennessee, as you know, the last few years has had trouble selling out at season tickets, and the turnstile count hadn't been as high as Tennessee would like. Do you feel like you need to get some quality non-conference opponents at home to lure the fans to the stadium?
Well, I think your point's well taken, and I think there has to be a balance there. I mean, if I was a fan, and we have the greatest fan base anywhere, I've said that many times, the passion and the loyalty is extremely impressive, particularly when you become a part of this family. Having said that, if I was a fan, I'd be on that bandwagon. I'd want us to line up against 3 or 4 of the top 10 teams in the country, in addition to the Southeastern Conference. But that's really not feasible, and that's not where the balance will be found. So we'll still have bye games, because I think that's a necessity, and particularly in this conference.
2 of your marquee home SEC games are against Alabama and Florida. The ticket price is $80, and that's the most for a Tennessee home game. What's the thinking on charging that much for those 2?
I think the variable ticket structure is pretty common now, in terms of, if you look across the spectrum of college football, not only in the Southeastern Conference, but in the other conferences that, quote, look like us, that's a pretty standard mechanism now for people who are going to variable ticket structures and taking the most attractive and traditional games. And we did this, of course, as you look at what other people are charging, that is not out of the realm of feasibility in terms of what other people are doing. We've
seen 2 coaches in the SEC that are in favor of counting division games only toward winning the division title. Steve Spurrier mentioned that the other day. Les Miles has jumped aboard on that thought. What is your thinking on that? I think it warrants conversation. Unlike Steve's proposal last year that he wanted to pay the players out of his own pocket, I think this one warrants conversation. And my sense is that the football coaches, will have that conversation in Destin. I don't know that it will be received in terms of any unanimous recommendation coming forward, but I think they'll talk about it.
Hey, Dave, this is Vince Ferrara. Good to talk to you again, Dave.
Good, Vince. Good to hear your voice.
Well, I appreciate it. Talk about the Chick-fil-A Kickoff Classic, going from the decision to play the game to the release of the schedule with September 1st for that first game and announcing of a doubleheader prior to that, to them wanting to have 2 separate dates for that game, and you deciding to play that game on that Friday night, which not everyone has been on board on as far as the fans. Kind of take us through that process, if you could.
Well, first of all, Vince, and that's a good question. A lot of moving parts, as you've just articulated, but First of all, that's a great opportunity. I've had an opportunity to be in those games over the years, really, in terms of that first weekend, and even before the Chick-fil-A kickoff became formalized. So I think what that does from an exposure standpoint, number one, is it generates a lot of exposure for the university and for our athletics program, and particularly our football program, because in this part of the country, and the two of you know this full well, once you get past the 4th of July, then people get the shakes. They're ready for football. They want the ball to be in the air. And all the talk is about that first weekend. And so I've seen that firsthand, and I think there's a real value on that. I think from a coaching perspective, you get the players' attention immediately because you're not opening with one of those games Jimmy referred to earlier. You're opening probably with a team that's going to be in a lot of preseason prognostication somewhere in that 20 to 25 range. So you're going to have the potential of opening against a ranked team, and that gets the players' attention. So I like the idea. Relative to what happened with all the shuffling, when the Chick-fil-A Bowl decided this year to have 2 games, the doubleheader wasn't practical. It just simply wasn't. There was no way to turn 2 games in one day with the end zones and fans getting out of the building and more fans coming into the building. That was not feasible, and I never thought that it was feasible, although I guess it was considered. Then when they began the shuffling, they presented us with 2 choices, really. 3, Thursday, Friday, Monday. Well, from our fans' perspective, Thursday is pretty tough because if you got kids, they're in school, you got to work. And we thought that Friday night, and we wouldn't do this again because of high school football, and I talked to the both high school associations about this, as did Mike Slive. But we just decided that was better for our fans because of the whole Labor Day weekend, that the Friday night was better than a Monday or a Thursday. So that's kind of the conversations we had over the course of several weeks.
Some fans said, well, why are we even playing the game? Why don't we just have a home day? Was there any consideration given to not play that game or back out in some form or fashion?
No, because, Vince, we had a contract. When I arrived here, that game was already on contract. So, no, we did not have that alternative.
I know in trying to build up your reserve from $5.5 million, I wondered if there's any consideration that would be given in the future to maybe cutting back on the donations made by the athletic department to the university.
No, Jimmy, I don't think that's feasible, because I think when you look at the total spectrum of what the university needs to operate, that we're in a position and have been gracious in our, and should be gracious in our willingness as an athletic department to assist in that vein. What we do have to do is strategically develop a long-term plan to where we can begin building our reserve and reducing our debt service. And we don't have a plan, or have not had a plan, but we will have, because I think that's critically important that we develop such a plan in concert with the appropriate people, the chancellor and others here at the university.
Do you think the SEC should have a uniform drug policy and a uniform transfer policy?
We've talked about that as a conference, Jimmy, but each time we do, the decision remains the same, that should be an institutional prerogative. And so I don't think that's going to change, because we had a healthy conversation about that within the last year or so. And I can understand the position that everyone agreed upon, that should remain as an institutional prerogative.
How disappointed were you at the news that the football team had a cumulative GPA below a 2.1, a GPA of 1.9 among the scholarship athletes, and 30 players on academic probation last fall?
Well, that was 5 months ago, and what I've focused on now is this semester, and I think, and we'll know shortly, Jimmy, how we did this semester. But everybody is hoping that was just an aberration, and like I say, that was December, and this is May, and and we're focused now on moving forward.
With the addition of Missouri and Texas A&M, I'm sure there's going to be a restructuring of the TV contract. Is the league close to redoing that with CBS and ESPN? Do you know?
Well, I don't think you can put a timetable on it because of the nature of the negotiation. But, we have the finest people at that table that you could ever want. So I'm very, very confident that that will proceed as in a pace that makes sense, and that's about all you can say about it. Is you can't put a timetable on something of that magnitude.
On men's basketball, they were told that they could only have 2 walk-ons because he didn't want to exceed 15 on the roster.
First of all, you have to look at the rosters across the Southeastern Conference, and only 2 of the 14 teams had more than 15 players plus, on their total roster. So, I think that's kind of much ado about nothing in the sense that we were one of those 2 teams. Everyone else was at 15 or below, and Conzo's fine with that, and that'll work just fine.
There had been some talk before you arrived about the retiring of Dale Ellis's jersey. What's your take on that? Has there been discussion of that since you've become the athletic director at Tennessee?
There's been discussion about retired jerseys, and not only that one, but potentially others. So we're trying to have a conversation that would lead us to some action in terms of how we would go about that. And we're looking at the existing criteria, Jimmy, for retired jerseys and trying to tweak that to kind of swing that door open a little bit more than the current criteria would allow.
And are you talking about, as far as the retirement, not just basketball, but football and other sports as well?
Yes, we are. This would be a comprehensive review of the current criteria and then how we could potentially tweak it to again allow more access and more opportunities for people.
Interesting. Do you have like a committee that's studying that? How are you going about that?
We're going about that with our executive staff, which is our primary group in the new structure. So that group is the group who's looking at that.
One of the hot topics right now is the +1, the seeded +1, some type 14 playoff. What's your stance on that, and are you pretty confident that in at least another 2 years we might see some type of a 14 playoff?
I've always been a playoff proponent, Jimmy. I think I've always been in favor of a playoff. So to me, it's very appealing that it's becoming real. Yes, I do think that in some shape or form that we will go to a playoff in this next iteration of postseason football. Finally, I think will come to fruition.
One of the discussions is whether to have campus sites, campus stadiums, be the host of semifinals. You've been a part of some great atmospheres in college football. In your opinion, would you be in favor of host sites or neutral sites?
On the surface of host sites, Vince, it looks real appealing. But then when you get into the practical application, it looks far less appealing because you would only have a very, very short turnaround if that option were to become real. And then what do you do with, your own fans? I mean, so the other team wants tickets, sponsors want tickets. I think there would be some hurdles and perhaps some very serious hurdles to get over to apply that strategy. So I just don't know. Again, it's being discussed, as you said, is one of the possibilities, but I just don't know at the end of those conversations how practical that will be.
It was a year ago that the SEC voted to do away with divisions in men's basketball. Do you think it served its purpose, or do you think that's something that might come up for discussion again this year at the spring meetings?
Good question, Jimmy. For this reason, when that decision was made, obviously we were a 12-team league, and it was driven by the fact that there was a perception that, if the West was perceived as being down, and I was at Alabama at that time when Alabama did not get into the tournament, even though if you had lined all the teams up, it would have looked much different from a perception standpoint. But now that we're 14 teams, I think that warrants probably a revisit, and I'm sure the coaches will take a look at that. I don't know that anything will change, but I think it warrants a revisit.
You enjoying the caravan?
Very much. I'm enjoying the caravan and enjoying this role very much, and people have been just terrific to Pam and me, and we feel very, very much a part of the Tennessee family, and we're very happy here.